My name's Dan Gannon. My hometown was the Mingo-Colfax area. I come from a family of 14, and I was next to the oldest, and I said they prepared me for combat. Well, I was getting ready to graduate from Iowa State in 1968, and I was going to get drafted according to the Jasper County Board draft board, and so I decided I should use my education. So for some reason I decided I should sign up for the United States Marine Corps. During the Vietnam War, they needed second lieutenants, infantry officers, very bad in Vietnam when I went in, and they didn't change their training or loosen the training up to accept more. We had 333 in my officer candidate school, and I think about 163 graduated. And if you didn't graduate, if it wasn't for medical, then you went to Parris Island, which is the enlisted boot camp, and you started all over again. So there was a little bit of incentive to graduate. I flew into Vietnam in Da Nang, where the Marine Corps was in the I Corps, the northernmost corps, and the 1st Marine Division headquarters was right north of Da Nang. And that's where you reported, and then from there you were sent out to your operation. But all the various things that happened in Vietnam, there is some adjustment. And I had a great platoon sergeant. So any OGSing that I got in Vietnam was from this platoon sergeant, was on his 3rd tour. And then they flew me out in a helicopter to my platoon in the field, and the next day I'm in a firefight. It was a major adjustment because one thing they can't teach you in school, they can teach you all the knowledge, the tactics, the leadership skills that you need to be able to use, but they can't teach you how you're going to react in a combat environment. And that was one of the things that they would tell you. It's an adjustment. Some of you are going to be able to do that, and some of you are not. I spent 1 year in the bush, we called it, in fighting. You're in an environment now where it's life and death, but the bigger thing, the responsibility that a platoon leader was what I was. You have the responsibility of all your men, their safety and their health, and to complete the mission with the least amount of casualties. So there was a tremendous responsibility there. The basic thing we did in Vietnam was patrolling, because in I Corps is basically all jungle, so it was a different kind of fighting than you might say in World War II, where you had front lines and you moved in a horizontal or a direct movement forward, because you could be moving in any specific direction, but you're always on patrol, so you're quite spread out. And then if you got in a firefight, a lot of times your unit got broken down into squad level or fire team level fighting. And then I had to control the 3 different squads that I had. And it's different than the wars today. There's no break. There's no safe place to come back to, at least in the units I was in, because you spent the whole time in the bush. Once in a while you got pulled out to a fire base, but every day you basically lived in the field. That was your living environment. So every day you had to be prepared for a firefight or whatever activity that happened that day. Well, the North Vietnamese Army was very good. They were very dedicated. They would fight till the end. I would say the Viet Cong was different than that because they lived in the South. They weren't as dedicated to fighting till the end. So if you were fighting a North Vietnamese Army unit, you knew you were in for a fight. I would say probably the most difficult aspect is once you make contact, is finding them and then making that decision of what you're going to do to get to them. Because when you're fighting in the more jungle environment, you aren't sure where they're at, how many are there, so it's more it's kind of you kind of hesitate to try to size up the situation. You talk to your squad leaders and your platoon sergeant and try to figure out what's the best thing to do here. But most of the time we were in the offense. I never was ever in a position where we dug in and like to protect a hill and stayed there for a length of time. No, we were constantly on the move. Downtime, you were constantly, as the Marine Corps does, you're constantly training your replacement. In other words, either my platoon sergeant or the most senior squad leader, you were constantly preparing them to take over if something happened, because that could happen any minute, any hour. And then they were doing the same thing for their subordinates. Every day was a new day, and you wanted to survive that day and move to the next day. We were down along a river that was in the area called the Arizona Territory. It's southwest of Da Nang, out by a fire base called An Hoa. And it was the main river that kind of cut through the rice paddy area. A lot of trees and a lot of tree lines, a lot of hidden areas. We had gotten word through intelligence that there was a cache of weapons down along the river, and they gave us some coordinates. And so we were out. That was our mission for the day, was to find that cache of weapons. And as we approached the cache of weapons, and we did find it later, we were ambushed, but it was from across the river, but the river was quite narrow and the water was very shallow there. So they ambushed us in that particular day, and that was one of the worst things you can go through, as an ambush and survive. And of course, we dove back into the tall elephant grass, and so there was some sandbars that the river had made that you could get down at least away from most of the rounds. And of course, we were there and trying to size up the situation. I had lost radio communications temporarily. The antenna had broken off from the top of the radio, my radio. So I was yelling to my squad leaders to gather up, and we had one squad leader. He was from Hawaii, and his nickname was Pineapple. Everybody had a nickname in Vietnam. Of course, I think everybody from Hawaii was called Pineapple. But anyway, he was working his way through the brush, and I could hear him coming. There was the area I was laying. It was very sandy, not so much brush we were laying, but we did have protection. And I just rolled over so he could lay down, flop down beside me. And just as soon as I moved, he took a round that went through the neck and came out his back. And then he was medevac. And I think he later died, but I never found out for sure. But when he was put on the helicopter, he was unconscious. But that was a day. Again, you didn't get ambushed every day, and that's one of the things one of the things you didn't want to happen. But every day, just being in the right place, the right time, you survived. And you got to remember too, platoon leaders were the most vulnerable. They would say in a firefight, your life expectancy is about 25 to 30 seconds because you're the leader. And once they determine who the leader is, then that's the person they're trying to kill, thinking this is going to disrupt the unit. But the Marine Corps you're always planning for the replacement. So very few times I would think our units got disrupted because the next person would step up and take over that position. But that was their intent. So as a platoon leader, your life expectancy wasn't very good in Vietnam. But most of our close air support was done with the Cobras, of course, then the F-4 Phantoms, and the other jets that supported it. But we very seldom did we talk to them directly. They're flying. You can hear them up above flying, and they flew in a large circle. You could hear the jets, but you could never see them. And they would move ahead of us or off to our sides as we were moving through an operation, gave us aerial recon. But also, if we had enemy sighted, then they could help us with the close air support. And they would use white phosphorus rockets. Once we pinpointed it, they would pinpoint it. Then they'd move out of the way, and then in would come the jets at a high rate of speed. They weren't there very long, and then they would drop their bombs or their napalm. We had this thing called nape and snake. You would drop the napalm, and then you would try to burn everything or burn out the enemy. Then after they did that, then they would come back around and they would drop a bomb called the snake eye bomb. It was about a 250-pound bomb that had fins or wings on it to slow it down so they could come in close. And after you had those two, it was pretty devastating. When I came back from Vietnam, yeah, you were treated differently. I didn't know very little what was going on back here. You'd hear a little bit. Communication, I think in 68, 69, it wasn't bad yet, but there was things going on. And when you came home, you weren't treated very well. And one of our Friday briefings, when the troops would have the weekend off, was don't wear your uniform, be as civilian as you could possibly be, because normally they get into fights and confrontations. Now, it's kind of hard to tell a Marine that. And also, they look like Marines. Pretty much, you were told to keep your mouth shut and don't talk about it. And that's pretty much what I did for a number of years. I had post-traumatic stress issues from that, and it took me about 40 years to deal with that after I was diagnosed with cancer from Agent Orange. And then I started getting involved and got help through the VA hospital and the VA system, and then that's how I got involved with all the volunteer work that I do today. There was a lot of books written until recently. Probably in the last 3 or 4 years, there were very untrue books, very negative books about Vietnam, but there's books coming out and a lot of things coming out about the true facts. And I try to impress those facts. I'm very proud of what I did. I went there to serve my country, and I served my country well, so I don't feel at all negative about about the Vietnam experience. I thought I handled it well, and I was successful, and I'm very proud of what I did. I just say treat the veteran with respect. They went and fought their country, and they don't make policy. Whether you agree or disagree with a war, whether you agreed or disagree with the Vietnam War isn't the issue. And I try to tell groups that I talk to that the issue is you go and you serve your country, and you serve it proudly, and you serve it correctly. And again, the soldier doesn't make the policy. The soldier is just doing a job and doing it very well today.